Okay, welcome to part 2 of biodiversity. I hope you've had a good go at this exam question. I'll put the mark scheme up for you here. There we go. The idea of why it would be good on a golf course to have lots and lots and lots of different variety in areas is that you've got an increase in variety of plants and shrubs and grass, which makes more habitats, or these things called ecological niches, for your organisms, and a greater variety of food sources, so more food sources. Okay. You're not going to have more food because that could be just more of the same, something that various organisms can't eat. So it needs to be more variety of food sources. So I hope you read the question carefully. A lot of students read it the other way round and answered the question, why would putting a golf course there lower the diversity, which is not the question. Right? As it says there, explain the effect of developing the golf course on the diversity of index. It's the idea we've got a variety of organisms. So golf course is not always bad. Okay. I hope the sound's a bit better on this video than the first part. I have got a new microphone and plugged that in as well. So I've now got 2 webcams, 2 screens, 2 microphones, and a whole bunch of other tech here. So, I'll take a photograph of it at some point and put it on my Instagram. I'm joking, I don't know what that is. So, moving on. So, we're going to look at applications of this biodiversity and species diversity stuff in this second half of this one. So this is still A-level biology, biodiversity topic. So in the UK, what is the land used for? So largely, we might not think of ourselves as particularly diverse. If you had to guess, make a list, guess at the percentages. So without resorting to Google, take 3 minutes now. You can pause me, unlike in real life, and take a guess at the percentages. So do that now. Now. Okay, done that? Right, good. So, hopefully you come up with some sensible suggestions, like some of the UK is built up, some of it is farmlands, some of it is forest, some of it is coastland, wetland, mountains, all that kind of stuff. But the percentages usually students get quite wrong. It would suggest that the UK is anything up to 50, 60, 70% built up, right, built on tarmac, and we've got no forest and anything like that. This isn't true, okay? So this is from a document I found from the government, which is called the Land Use in 2017, and was released in 2019 as an experimental official statistics release on planning, okay, on where we should be building. And this is sort of the most up-to-date figures I could find from the UK government on what our land is actually used for. So as you can see, it's only about 8% of the land of England is developed, with 92% not developed. Now if you chuck Scotland and Wales into that, that number goes down by quite an amount because they're less built up than parts of England. So 92% not developed. So it's a much lower number than you might have thought. So the biggest use by far in England is agriculture, 63%. So that is a large proportion of our land. And the biggest developed category is, of course, our roads. So our roads, our rail, and our utilities. So that's about 4%. So this is power stations and various transmission lines and substations and roads and rail and all that kind of stuff. And then 1% of the total land in England is residential use. So your houses make up 1% of the total area. And if you add the gardens in, then you get a further 5%. Which obviously is not evenly distributed, but that's basically what you get in terms of footprint. So actually we've got quite a bit of open land. And the best figures I could find for how much forest we've got, because of course that's the native, what we call climax community. If you leave the UK alone for hundreds of years, you get broadleaf woodland. That's at about 13% nowadays, which actually doesn't sound like much, and it isn't much, but it's much better than it was in the 80s when it dropped to about 8 or 9%. There's some fantastic charities like the Woodland Trust that you can look into, who do great work reforesting areas to try and encourage our natural wildlife. So it's not as much as you think that's built up, but still. So when I went to Madagascar, this is a picture from 2012 with our guide. This is our guide called Armand. He showed us around Madagascar, wonderful man. When we left Madagascar, never thought to see him again. To give you an idea of an outsider's perspective, though, of how the UK uses its land and how eco we are, he actually managed, via a reciprocal agreement with a travel agency that he worked with, to get himself a trip to the UK. To put the long story short, for being a brilliant, brilliant tour guide. He was brought over to see some of the people he guided around Madagascar. And actually, Ashton was going to meet up with him. So that's just down the road, that's in Turk's Head last year. And he said some really interesting things about land use and biodiversity in the UK. Of course, he's a bit of an expert, as he is an ecotourism guide in Madagascar. He said he was amazed at how green we are in the UK, how much we love our animals, and how eco-friendly as a country we actually are. Now, obviously, we've got an awful lot more to do, but that should give you an outsider's perspective that some of the biggest ecological challenges are probably not here, they're elsewhere in the world. So, in the UK, right, our main issue, our main land use there is farming. So how we farm. So in terms of an effect on biodiversity, it's how we farm that has an impact. So more intensive farming equals less diversity, of course. Because if you replace a meadow of wildflowers with corn, you're replacing a huge diversity, many, many different species, with one. Okay? So you get a loss of habitat, a loss of food, a loss of space. As far as a pollinating insect goes, a field full of corn is effectively a desert because there's no flowers, there's no water, there's no food for anything for them, and they can be miles and miles and miles, square miles of field before they can get to anything they can actually land on or use. So, hedges, of course, are massively important. There was a big push a few decades back to do big single crop, big fields, more efficient farming. So single crop farming, get rid of the hedges, you can have one big combine harvester, more efficient farming. And to an extent, that's still the case, but there is more of a push back now to go back towards, not fully, towards smaller fields. So if you go to other parts of the world, you get what's called subsistence farming, where people aren't farming for commercial purposes, they're farming for their own families. They've got a little field of crops, they've got some animals, they've got some vegetables. Obviously that is very, very diverse, and it's essentially how we farmed in the UK up until sort of after the Second World War, where we had to, during the war, industrialise our food production to feed our population. Okay, so there's a key word here which is called monoculture. So commercial farming is what we call monoculture, basically one crop or animal, and it isn't very diverse, right? And therefore it's not very sustainable. So we like to think of the UK as looking a bit like that. Obviously, that is an idealised view of the British countryside. You've got different fields, you've got some hedgerows, you've got some wildflowers in the foreground, you've got some mountains in the back there, you've got some woodland, and if any of you can guess where that is, that's actually taken in the Yorkshire Dales. So, but mostly, if you've flown out of the UK in the daytime and looked down, most of the UK doesn't look like that, it looks like that, okay? Which is far, far less diverse. So, in terms of conclusions, in the short term, a monoculture would mean that the yield of a farm goes up. So you farm one crop, you have less equipment, fewer workers, you end up with more profit. But in the long term, due to things like erosion, due to things like the loss of quality of your soil, the yield will end up going down. And the classic example of this, which you've probably learned in things like geography, is in the rainforest, where the rainforest has been chopped down, crops have been growing on them, but actually it was the forest that was keeping that ground fertile. So a couple of years later, it's no longer good for pasture or farming, so you've got to chop down more forest. It's not sustainable. Okay? So essentially, hedges for the win. Right. Obviously it's a global problem, so we'll move quickly into a more wider context around the globe. Deforestation is a massive global problem. It's especially worrying in rainforests because they cover about 6% of the Earth's surface, but have got over 50% of the Earth's species in them. To give you a map here, so this is the Congo River in Africa. So that's one of the world's largest rivers. There you can see a lake here, so that's one of the rivers. And the only other feature visible from space, of course this is taken from orbit, is these features up here and these logging roads. Okay, so on the same scale as one of the largest rivers on the planet, you've got logging roads as well. Okay, so that's pretty worrying. If you go down to ground level, you can see deforested areas like this. Right, and essentially we've gone from a few hundred years ago, of almost entirely forested planet. Right, you can see the UK there is completely green, to basically shrinking back the forests to those green patches there. Okay, and the yellow patches being sort of sub-forest ecosystems. So it's pretty worrying, the loss of forest. So why? If you go to these places, you might think before you arrive that people are chopping them down because they don't care. They just want to chop them down because it's quick and easy. Now for some people that is the case, some areas that is the case, but if you actually meet the people who live in these areas, it's not the reason that they're chopping down their forests. They feel as strongly about their own ecosystem as you would about your own environment where you grew up. Of course, logging is an issue. Farming, small-scale slash and burn farming is a big issue, and then obviously large-scale plantations like ranches. So, for example, coffee, palm oil, soya, cattle ranching, of course, are all very, very bad. But this boils down to money. Okay, so biofuels as well. Boils down to money, and if you give people other things to do with their time and other ways to make money, then you find they're actually very, very willing not to chop the forest down, which is a good thing for everybody. Fragmentation, another key term you should know. Basically, it's where there's a lot of total forest, but none of it's joined up. So protected forest areas, little patches of reserves are split up. That obviously reduces biodiversity, as big things and predators can't mix, top carnivores can't mix. Okay, particularly large things that need to roam around. And you may have seen pictures of orangutans in Borneo in tiny little patches of forest left over, and they can't move between the forests, so they can't find enough food and they can't find enough mates without moving through the palm oil plantations. So again, if we go into the Amazon, which is there in South America, okay, this is an environment called the cloud forest, and it's where I took an expedition in 2014 to the country of Ecuador. Okay, so there's Ecuador, okay, that's the Colombian border, and that is the site we went to research. The idea, all the dark green bits in that map are protected environments, are protected ecosystems, but the light green stuff is essentially no different. It's the same forest, but if you want to, you could just go in there with a chainsaw and chop it down. Okay, and the idea was to prove to the Ecuadorian government by research, by data gathering, that the light green stuff was no different from the dark green stuff, and therefore why is that whole red area that you can see outlined there not being protected as one massive reserve for the larger predators. Things like puma, various bears up there that needed that large scale area to roam. Okay, so the area we were talking about was the Santa Lucia Cloud Forest Reserve, and it looked like that. Absolutely stunning, stunning place to be. As one of our students, who I think that probably would be her profile picture for whatever social media platform of choice is forever. And on the ground, it looks like that. As you can see, that without even doing the calculations, that's an incredibly diverse environment with some very, very friendly wildlife. Okay, and of course, walking through the forest was an absolute treat. Meeting the Waruni people, that's called a sabo tree, which still exists in those parts of the world, that are being rapidly chopped down for hardwood logging. Okay, so we'll go into that in more detail when we talk about conservation. But in terms of summary, diversity comes in several types, which is what we covered. The Simpsons Diversity Index and maths that we've done. The pros and cons of the different diversity measurements and when you might use them. What a monoculture is, what deforestation is and why people might do it, and fragmentation of forests. And we'll cover a lot more on the conservation side when we get to that point. We'll do the conservation lesson specifically at the beginning of Week 13. If you're interested, however, the organisation, all those expeditions run through is one called Operation Wallacea. I'll put a link in the description below. I do recommend you have a read of their blog, have a look at their website. They are an exceptional conservation organisation, and one I've been involved with for about 10 years. And hopefully you guys, if you're interested in this kind of thing, can get involved with them too. Okay, thanks very much.